The notion that we did not accept the HEROES Act from the House is not news. And the notion that trying to put the HEROES Act on the floor of the Senate without the opportunity for debate or amendment is also not the right way to try to build bipartisan legislation for a deal. I also find it incredible that this administration's actions sanctioning Russia are considered to be a pinprick in comparison to whatever greater sledgehammer is supposedly needed. The CATSA legislation that I referenced, which was passed in the first year following the election of President Trump, which President Trump signed and supported, was a massive increase in American sanction authority against Russia and North Korea, by the way, and has been utilized more by this president than any sanction authority that any other president has ever had. And the sanction regime that we are putting in place today against Russia is designed to go aggressively at election interference. And just the argument that nobody is doing anything is simply wrong. Now, I stand ready to work to build even stronger sanction regimes that can work without destroying our own economy or work without destroying our own industry in different sectors, which is part of the problem with the bill that is being proposed without amendment here today. But we need to recognize that the accusations that this administration and this Senate do not take election interference seriously when we pass the most significant sweeping legislation that has ever been passed in this country to deal with it, and that there is no effort to try to work on the COVID relief package is part of, frankly, the political attack of the day. I'm sorry, this is simply wrong. If we want to work together on either of these two issues or other issues, we can on this floor, but we can't do it by these kinds of motions to adjourn and unanimous consent requests to bring bills to the floor and pass them without amendment. It's just not the way, and my colleague knows this is the kind of thing that Republicans and Democrats do. They want to bring attention to their legislation, but that's not the way you build a bipartisan agreement that can actually become law. Thank you, Mr. President.
Brief in response. This is a bipartisan bill. It's a bipartisan bill. It's got bipartisan co-sponsorship. We've been working for 3 years. We've made changes. And the proof that everything we're doing right now is not working is the fact that we just had the DNI say we continue to have Russian interference and other interference in our election. That's why we've got to do something.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I've enjoyed the colloquy here between our colleagues on election interference. I'm privileged to serve on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence that's undertaken a 3.5-year-long investigation of the election interference that occurred in 2016. And I think the 5-volume report of the Select Committee on Intelligence, bipartisan report, is indicative of the seriousness with which we all treat this subject. But I appreciate the senator from Idaho, the chairman of the Banking Committee, for his comments, for refreshing all of our memories about the huge amounts of money that we spent in assistance to state and local election authorities, as well as the good work being done by the Department of Homeland Security to help them secure their networks against cyber attacks, and as well as other elements of the United States government, including our intelligence community, the National Security Agency, and others. This is important work, but I agree with him. This is not how we actually build bipartisan consensus here, by coming and asking for unanimous consent without going through the appropriate procedures and frankly, the hard work that it takes to build consensus. But Mr. President, on another matter today, the Senate Judiciary Committee advanced the nomination of Judge Amy Coney Barrett to serve on the Supreme Court. Throughout her hearing last week, Judge Barrett wowed America, and certainly my constituents in Texas with her impressive knowledge of the law and her clear understanding about the limited but important role that judges play in our republic. She followed the precedent set down by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the so-called Ginsburg rule, and refrained from answering questions on how she would rule in future cases or commenting on contentious political issues. And I think she was correct to do so. We shouldn't embroil judges in the political controversies that we debate here. Judges are not policymakers primarily. They're certainly not accountable to the voters. They have lifetime tenure. That's why their responsibilities are limited but important at the same time. Nor by asking her questions back in 2017 about her religious beliefs, whether she is an Orthodox Catholic, having to listen to statements like, well, the dogma lives loudly within you because she's a woman of faith, suggesting that somehow she would violate her oath as a judge and impose her own views instead of the law from the bench. Well, Judge Barrett, I think, took all of us to school a little bit and reminded us very clearly that it's the judge's job to impartially apply the law as written, whether it's the Constitution itself or the laws that Congress passes. She not only stated her commitment to this most basic principle, but she also has a record to back it up. During her time on the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, Judge Barrett has sided with her colleagues 95% of the time in more than 600 cases. It's no surprise the American Bar Association, which the minority leader has called the gold standard, gave Judge Barrett its highest rating, saying she's well qualified to serve on the Supreme Court. But we all knew that. As I looked around the room during the first day of questioning, I noticed all the binders that people like I and my other colleagues had, notebooks, piles of paper, books, reference books on both the desks of Republican and Democratic members of the committee. If my colleagues' materials preparing for this historic hearing were anything like mine, they included previous decisions by Judge Barrett, academic writings, letters of support, detailed background information about her career. But I noted that as Judge Barrett was answering our questions, she seemed to be doing so without even glancing down at any notes. So I asked Judge Barrett, I violated the #1 rule that you learn as a lawyer, not to ask a question you don't know the answer to. But I did it anyway because I had a hunch. And I asked her to hold up the notepad sitting in front of her to show us what materials she had been using during the hearing. And it was a memorable moment. She held it up and smiled, and it was blank. I think that spoke volumes about her competency, her preparation, her intelligence, all things that would commend her confirmation. Well, with each question she answered, Judge Barrett demonstrated her vast knowledge of the law. She made clear she understood, as I said, the limited role of judges, and she showed compassion and heart as she poured herself into her work each and every day. Numerous senators have noted that under ordinary circumstances, a nominee like this would get overwhelming support. But unfortunately, these aren't normal circumstances. Our colleagues on the other side made clear from the get-go that for them, this confirmation process wasn't even about the nominee or her qualifications. They attempted to hijack the hearing and use it for, well, it's a harsh word, but it's true, fear-mongering. Last week's hearing was like split-screen TV. On one half, Republican senators asked the judge about her judicial philosophy, prior rulings, and a range of constitutional doctrines. On the other half, our Democratic colleagues delivered monologues about Obamacare, about a future case that she may be called upon to participate in. And they attempted to convince the American people that if she was confirmed, she would somehow take away their health care. Well, that's at bottom an insult to the judge somehow presumes that she is essentially auditioning for the job based on a ruling in a future case. That would violate every aspect of a judge's oath. As Judge Barrett noted, judges don't make policy pronouncements, they decide cases. And she very carefully described the case that's pending in front of the Supreme Court. It's not about Obamacare writ large. It's about a technical doctrine called severability. If one part of a statute's deemed unconstitutional, and this one I believe is, the individual mandate, because we zeroed out the penalty under the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the question is, does the rest of the legislation, does the rest of Obamacare stand? Or does it all have to be struck down? Well, she noted that there have been a number of cases decided recently by the current Supreme Court that seem to treat severability with particular care. And indeed, as a scholastic, as an academic, I think, she and others noted that it's not exactly appropriate for judges to go out and strike down statutes, except to the extent that they are unconstitutional. Well, she said if they're not coming for your health care, then she'll serve corporate interests, destroy the environment, somehow chip away at our liberties. Well, these are nothing but baseless scare tactics and stunts from our Democratic colleagues. The latest one came this morning when they actually boycotted the Judiciary Committee vote on Judge Barrett. They couldn't even be bothered to show up and vote against the nominee they claim is a threat to our democracy. So you know what? Judge Barrett was confirmed unanimously by the senators present today. Instead, in their chairs, they had large photographs, much like we've seen at sports arenas and ballparks in the wake of the pandemic, since we've had to socially distance, and you can't have a large crowd at the ballpark, so people have these cutouts. That's what it looked like in the Judiciary Committee today. And as I said, because of their antics, because of this stunt, Senator Graham asked for unanimous consent to proceed with the markup, and of course there was no objection because any potential objector had voluntarily absented themselves. But the truth of the matter is Judge Barrett's qualifications speak louder than the unsubstantiated claims made by her opposition. She graduated at the top of her class from Notre Dame Law School. She held 2 prestigious clerkships, including on the Supreme Court. And she's litigated in the trenches before transitioning into academia, where she wrote and taught constitutional law about our federal courts and statutory interpretation. And as I said, for the last 3 years, she's put all that great experience and training to work on the Seventh Circuit. This is an exceptional judge with a clear record of faithfully and impartially applying the law, and she will bring additional value to the United States Supreme Court. One of the things I thought was so remarkable is Judge Barrett is also an incredible role model. And I think it should be her elevation to the highest court in the land should be an encouragement to young women who aspire to professional success. And as a great role model on how to balance what we all try to figure out how to balance, which is your professional and your personal life. Well, she and her husband do a marvelous job with their 7 children, both being full-time professionals. If confirmed, she'd be the first mother of school-age children to serve as a justice and only the 5th woman to serve on the high court. She would also be the first justice on the current court, with a degree from a law school other than Yale and Harvard, and bring much needed educational diversity to the bench. Judge Amy Coney Barrett will serve our country well on the high court, and I have full faith in her ability to faithfully and impartially apply the law as written. I want to thank Chairman Graham for leading a fair and respectful hearing. The ranking member, Senator Feinstein, made that observation, and I thought that was very generous and civil of her. I would note that many of the more radical folks on the left have attacked Senator Feinstein for her civility, and they're just wrong. And I think she remains a good role model for all of us. We can have our disagreements without being rude or uncivil or disagreeable. And I think Senator Feinstein is a model for that. So I'm proud to support Judge Barrett's nomination in the Judiciary Committee, Mr. President, and I look forward to voting for her next week here on the Senate floor.
The senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, there are a lot of inscriptions, famous words, inspirational sayings that are detailed into and painted onto the walls of the Capitol. One of my favorites, which I think also happens to be one of the shortest, adorns a wall, I believe, on the way into the House chamber. The saying is attributed to Alexander Hamilton, and it reads simply,